March 9, 1945. 334 B-29 Superfortresses would lift up from Saipan and Tinian, heading for Tokyo. Their mission would lead to one of the most deadliest bombing runs in history. Contrary to popular belief, people think that Hiroshima or Nagasaki were the deadliest. Although they did inflict a lot of casualties and a lot of damage, the deadliest bombing run was not by a nuclear bomb. No, it was with clustered napalm bombs. The firebombing of Tokyo would kill well over 100,000 people, leave 1 million people homeless, and destroy 16 square miles of Tokyo. This is the story of Operation Meeting House, the night America showed Japan what hell really looked like. As always, we gotta take a look at the leading events to this. December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. The day that the Japanese decided to bring war to American soil, thus waking up a sleeping giant. It was around this point where, although America had a navy, it wasn't as strong as they should have been. Nonetheless, the next day, on December 8th, Franklin D. Roosevelt would officially declare war on Japan, officially bringing the Americans into World War II. And America would need a strategy to defeat Japan. Bringing the war directly to Japanese mainland would end very swiftly and would nearly be impossible. For example, America's best bomber at the time was a B-17 Flying Fortress. It had a max flight range of 3,250 miles. Yet from Pearl Harbor to Tokyo, it would still be 3,800 miles long, making bombing runs from mainland America to Japan nearly impossible. And yeah, they could just send the Navy, but once again, sending a full brute attack to the mainland would prove to be rather tricky. So America would start off fairly small, taking islands within the Pacific theater that the Japanese had previously overrun. America's first islands they would take would be Guadalcanal, which was part of the Solomon Islands. The Battle of Guadalcanal would begin on August 7th of 1942, when the Marines would make their landings on the shore. They would fight for 6 brutal months until finally taking the island on February 9th of 1943. In this success, they would strengthen troop morale, and at the same time slightly weaken the Japanese Navy by taking one of their airfields, essentially making themselves stronger too, because now they have an airfield that's closer to Japan. They would continue going around the Pacific theater, taking islands like Toga, Making, and Kwajalein at all, essentially weakening the Japanese Navy and also getting bases closer and closer to the Japanese mainland. And prior to this, a semi-important moment of the war would take place. It would receive the name of the Doolittle Raid and would take place on April 18th of 1942. This would be the first time in World War II where American bombers would be sent to the Japanese mainland on bombing runs. Led by Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle, the raid would involve 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers launched through the aircraft carrier, the USS Hornet, aiming for industrial sites in Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. And although these attacks would be very minimal, the missions would still be a success, being a major morale boost to the US troops. Not only that, but it would terrify the Japanese government, because now they finally knew they were not impervious to any American attacks, and their mainland was no longer safe. Major and minor conflicts in the Pacific theater would take place, until they would finally take the islands of Saipan and Tinian, with a plan to make the Japanese surrender would continue. Just a couple months prior, a major change to the United States military would occur. This would be the introduction of the new and improved B-29 Superfortress. This would now be America's most advanced and high-performing bomber, having a max flight range of 3,700 miles, making it a great bomber to be able to attack the Japanese mainland while still being able to land back at American-controlled islands in the Pacific theater. Now just wait, because the idea of attacking the Japanese mainland would stretch all the way back to 1943. The Marines would test out the use of incendiary bombs and makeshift Japanese houses in Utah. And if you remember my previous video of Project X-Ray, napalm would be way more efficient than normal bombs because Japanese houses were made out of wood. So hypothetically, if one bomb were to land, it would cause a big explosion, maybe cause some fires that would easily be able to be taken out. But napalm unleashes a sticky gel that cannot be put out any conventional way. So if you have a Japanese wooden city, what do you think will be more efficient? 1,000 bombs or 1,000 napalm bombs? But you see, America would want to test it on the real thing. Obviously. In November of 1944, a small raid on the edge of Tokyo would occur. They would still drop napalm bombs, but it would not be as efficient, and more tests would occur on other Japanese cities. This would be until a larger napalm bombing run would finally take place in March of 1945, with over 172 bombers making their way to Tokyo, destroying over 28,000 1,000 buildings. And this really showed the United States that strength in numbers would be the key to make Japan surrender in this war. And after seeing how effective this bombing run was, Major General Curtis Emerson LeMay would change the bombing tactics entirely. Instead of sending a couple of dozen bombers on a very strict path, he would send a couple hundred bombers on different paths at different times to ensure the maximum amount of damage would take place. You see, a couple dozen bombers would strike their target if lucky, and although night bombing was now doable, it was still hard. So they would have to fly at high altitudes at night and then drop their payloads right above their target. But another factor would take place. The wind would send the bombs every which way, making the bombing run not very effective and not very accurate. But what LeMay saw is, instead of sending a couple dozen bombers, if he sent hundreds, he would ensure that building that they were looking to destroy would burn. So he would change the strategy entirely. Not only would he send hundreds of bombers to a specific location, he would give them different times and different paths, so there's no longer follow the leader, essentially saving fuel, so now bombers could just go bomb and then come back home. And he would also send an order to strip excess weight off of bombers, only leaving 2 tail gunners to ensure that the bombers are fast and can carry the maximum amount of bombs. These changes in this attack on Tokyo would be approved on March of 1945 and would officially receive the name of Operation Meeting House. At 5:34 p.m., over 100 bombers would take off from the Marianian Islands of Saipan and Tinian, finally reaching their target 8 minutes after midnight. And all these bombers had been seen by the Japanese prior to this attack, but due to unreliable radars and communications, this attack would not be foreseen for the people in Tokyo. By 12:15, over 100 B-29 bombers, each carrying over 6.4 tons of napalm cluster bombs, would have either dropped their payloads or got close to dropping their payloads. The first of the bombing ones would make a giant X along their target, essentially making a giant target for the other bombers to hit. And it wasn't until after the first bombs were dropped that the Japanese air raid sirens would finally go off. At the same time, Japanese planes would try to go up to intercept these bombers, but again, due to unreliable radar and it being night, none of them were ever shot down. The bombers' main target would be in the northeastern part of Tokyo. This is where all the factories and the people working for the Japanese military basically were. Not only that, but it would also be home to over 1 million civilians, and all of those people would be caught off guard. It's at this time where things really do get gruesome for those people. After the first bombs were dropped and the sirens were alarmed, the people were told to evacuate. Some would completely ignore it, thinking that staying at their homes would be safer, and others would not care. This would be until the bombing would continue over and over and over. There were no bombing shelters, so there was nowhere for the people to go. Many reports of people trying to hide in different locations and getting burnt out were the case. People tried to hide in a stone school, they got smoked out. Some people tried to hide in a pool, they got boiled alive. And while some people were trying to cross a bridge over the Sumida River, one incendiary bomb would drop on that bridge, instantly killing thousands of people. Others would try to do makeshift dugouts, trapping themselves in the fire and the smoke. It got so bad to a point that even the bombers overhead had to wear gas masks because of all the burning flesh that was smelled. There were charred bodies in the river, along the streets. Everything was getting burnt. It was so hot that no matter what, even if you didn't touch the fire, it was reported that people's clothes just bursted into flames. Men, women, children, you name it, they would all perish on that very day, having bodies completely charred and most completely unrecognizable. Over the course of about a day, over 334 bombers, dropping a total of over 1,600 tons of napalm, would destroy the city of Tokyo, further showing how hellish war really can be. Noon the next day, all the fires would finally die out, leaving a trail of total carnage. Over 16 square miles of this city would be completely reduced to ash, with its death toll reportedly being over 150, and that was just bodies that could somewhat be identified. In actuality, some historians believe the death toll was over 200,000. You gotta remember, they destroyed 16 square miles, and the Shinomaki district was home to over 1 million people, essentially making this the most destructive and deadliest bombing run in human history. However, on the American side, 12 B-29 bombers would go down, with a reported 96 airmen going missing or being killed, although the damage caused was way worse. It's reported that over 200,000 buildings would be reduced to rubble and ash, leaving over 1 million people homeless, with the survivors of that night reportedly calling it the night of the Black Snow. And it wouldn't stop here, because America would continue bombing Japanese cities. This would be until Hiroshima and Nagasaki, essentially making the Japanese surrender, ending World War II. It's like, dude, Japan really got the short end of the stick, but in actuality, they practically asked for it, because America was just minding their own business, and then they were attacked. Who do you think is at fault here? And that, ladies and gentlemen, would be the time that America showed Japan what hell on earth really looked like. A day that was sadly overlooked due to the first nuclear bombs being dropped. Not many people know about the story. They all think that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the deadliest bombing runs in World War II. They were not. This was the story of Operation Meeting House, one of history's most deadly bombing runs. You guys have a good day and a good night. I love you all so much. Peace.